The battle was nearly over. The vast armada of the Galactic Dominion loomed over the final resistance fleet, their warships blotting out the stars as their cannons rained destruction. Energy beams slashed through the black void, ripping apart the last remnants of the rebellion. Explosions bloomed in the darkness, silent yet terrifying, as the once proud defenders of this sector were reduced to burning wreckage. On the Dominion's massive flagship, Dreadfang, Admiral Varric watched the battlefield unfold before him with cold satisfaction. Victory was inevitable. His fleet had crushed every last obstacle in their path, and now, the Resistance's final stronghold would fall. He had waited years for this moment, to be the one who would end the last defiant voices against the Dominion's rule. He turned to his officers, his deep voice carrying across the bridge. "It is done," he declared, watching the Resistance's command ship, Valor's Hope, take a direct hit. Its shields flickered, failing, and then the ship cracked apart, its hull breaking like shattered glass. The Dominion's forces let out a triumphant cheer. The Resistance had fought bravely, but bravery meant nothing against superior firepower. The battle was won, or so they thought. Then, something strange happened. A single ripple appeared on the sensors. An anomaly, a flicker of energy at the edge of the system. The Dominion's ships, still locked in formation, barely registered it at first. Then, without warning, a single warship emerged from the void. It was massive, sleek, and painted in the matte black of the abyss, its hull lined with scars of battles long forgotten. Its presence was like a ghost appearing on the battlefield, an unknown entity that sent an eerie silence through the Dominion's command channels. Varric frowned as his officers scrambled for answers. "What is that ship?" he demanded. The response came hesitantly, the officer's voice betraying a rare moment of uncertainty. "Sir, it's a human vessel." A chill ran down Varric's spine. Impossible. Humanity was gone. The Dominion had wiped them out. Earth had burned, and their fleets had been crushed. There had been no distress signals, no survivors, no hidden outposts. The species had been exterminated. And yet, here it was, a human warship standing alone against an entire armada. A deep silence fell over the bridge. Every Dominion officer knew the stories, the whispers of humanity's terrifying combat reflexes, their impossible ability to turn battles in their favor through sheer instinct, adaptability, and unpredictability. The Dominion had crushed countless species, but humanity had been different. They had fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen, like predators who had spent millennia at war with their own kind before ever reaching the stars. And now, this ship, this impossible ship, was here, right in front of them. Varric forced himself to remain calm. "Target the vessel," he ordered. "Destroy it immediately." The command spread through the Dominion fleet. Weapons locked on, cannons rotated, missiles primed. Within seconds, a wave of firepower surged toward the lone warship, enough to reduce a planet to rubble. But then, the impossible happened again. The human warship moved. Not in a way that made sense. It didn't dodge. It didn't activate shields. Instead, it vanished. The sensors lost track of it for a full second, an eternity in battle. Then, it reappeared inside the Dominion's formation, its cannons already firing, and its weapons were devastating. In an instant, 3 Dominion warships exploded, their shields offering no protection. The human ship's weapons tore through them like they were made of paper. It was not firing energy weapons like the Dominion, nor was it using traditional missiles. Its projectiles were something else, something faster, denser, deadlier. The Dominion's defensive systems struggled to react, but the warship was too fast. It twisted and weaved between enemy ships, striking with pinpoint precision. Every shot counted. Every movement was calculated. Varric's heart pounded. This wasn't just a warship, it was a hunter. And the Dominion fleet was its prey. A single transmission came through the bridge's speakers, crackling with interference, but clear enough to send a chill through every officer in the room. Galactic Dominion. You thought we were gone. You thought you had won. You were wrong. Varric gritted his teeth. All ships, regroup. Surround that vessel. He barked. Do not let it escape. But even as his orders were given, the Dominion fleet was already falling apart. Their carefully coordinated formations were useless against something that fought like no warship they had ever faced. The human ship didn't just fight. It anticipated. It outmaneuvered them, dodging heavy fire before they even knew where to aim. Its movements were instinctual, almost like it could predict their every command. Fear began to spread. Some Dominion officers whispered in horror, "How is this possible?" Others were too frozen to speak. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries, their military unmatched, their power unchallenged. And yet, in mere moments, this lone ship had turned the tide of battle. Admiral Varric clenched his fists. He refused to accept it. Humanity was dead. This ship could not exist. It had to be a trick, an illusion, a desperate last attempt at resistance. And yet, it was very real. As more Dominion ships erupted into flames, as the impossible warship continued its merciless attack, a horrifying realization began to sink in. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. Panic spread like wildfire through the Dominion fleet. Their victory had been certain, until now. The lone human warship moved like a predator among prey, weaving through the massive formations of Dominion vessels with an unnatural grace. Every move it made was a calculated strike, every shot precise and lethal. It didn't fire blindly or waste ammunition like other species. It struck only when necessary, and every time, something died. Admiral Varric's hands gripped the railing of his command deck, his eyes locked on the holographic display before him. The battlefield was a mess of burning debris and shattered warships, and yet, somehow, this one impossible ship was still intact. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The Dominion had crushed humanity, wiped them from existence. This ship shouldn't exist, and yet there it was, moving, hunting, killing. "Admiral," a lieutenant shouted, his voice laced with barely restrained fear. "We're losing ships at an alarming rate. We need to regroup." Varric's jaw clenched. Regroup against a single enemy. It was absurd. The Dominion's fleets had conquered entire star systems in a single day. They had crushed armadas, and yet now they were losing. No. Varric slammed his fist against the console, his voice cold and sharp. "We do not retreat. We are the Dominion. We will crush this thing and end whatever pathetic remnant of humanity dares to oppose us." But deep down, he wasn't so sure anymore. The Phantom ship was moving again. It wasn't a ship that followed predictable patterns. It was something else entirely. It didn't fight like the Dominion, like the other species they had conquered. It fought with instinct. It dodged before it should have known to dodge. It fired before an enemy even had the chance to aim. It was as if it could see the future. The Dominion forces tried everything. They swarmed it, surrounding it with sheer numbers, attempting to box it in. But every time they thought they had it trapped, it slipped through their grasp like a shadow. Their weapons systems struggled to lock onto it, as if it wasn't even real. "How is it moving like that?" One officer shouted, his hand shaking over his console. "It's reacting faster than our sensors can track." Then came the worst part. It started talking to them. A voice crackled through their communication channels, a voice that sent a chill down every Dominion officer's spine. It was calm, too calm. The kind of voice that belonged to something that didn't fear death. "You're slower than I expected." The bridge of the Dreadfang went silent. The officers turned to their admiral, waiting for a response. Varric's face darkened. "Who is this?" A small chuckle came through the comms, mocking, unshaken. "You already know who I am." The holographic display flickered as the Dominion's computers tried to trace the signal, but the source was everywhere and nowhere. It was as if the voice was speaking from the void itself. Varric gritted his teeth. "Human filth, you should not exist." Another chuckle. Then the voice replied, soft but deadly. And yet, here I am. A warning alarm blared. Admiral, another officer shrieked. It's charging something. Unknown energy signature. On the main screen, the phantom ship came to a halt. For the first time, it was still. It sat in the void, its hull almost blending into the darkness of space, as if daring them to act first. The Dominion scanners tried to make sense of what was happening, but the readings made no sense. The energy buildup was unlike anything in their databases. It didn't match any known human weaponry. And then, it fired. A single shot. Not a volley, not a barrage, just one. For a second, it seemed unimpressive, just a streak of light against the darkness. But then, it hit. A Dominion battleship, one of the largest in the fleet, imploded. Not exploded, imploded. It folded in on itself, its entire structure crushed by forces beyond understanding. No fire, no debris, just gone. Silence. Varric's breathing became ragged. This wasn't just war. This was something else. The phantom ship moved again. It didn't flee. It advanced. You made a mistake. The voice continued, now laced with something colder, something deadly. Varric's hands trembled. For the first time in his career, he felt fear. You should have left humanity alone. The battlefield had turned into something out of a nightmare. Where once the Dominion fleet had floated in perfect formation, a symbol of their undeniable power, now there was only chaos. The lone human warship, a ghost, a predator, a demon in the dark, moved through the wreckage it had created, unharmed, unstoppable. It didn't hesitate. It didn't retreat. It only destroyed. Admiral Varric could barely breathe. He had fought in 100 battles, had crushed empires beneath the Dominion's heel, had watched civilizations burn at his command. He had never felt fear. Not until now. Not until this. He forced himself to move, gripping the console as his officers screamed reports at him. They were losing. Losing to something that shouldn't have been possible. This ship, it's too fast. We can't predict its movement. Our weapons can't lock on. It's like it knows where we're aiming before we fire. Admiral, we need to fall back. Varric clenched his jaw. Fall back. The Dominion never retreated. They were the greatest military force in the galaxy. They were. A blaring alarm cut through his thoughts. Nuwu energy signature. It's. The human warship fired again. Varric barely had time to process what he was seeing. A second battleship, the Dominator, one of the most feared vessels in the Dominion fleet, simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just gone. The bridge went silent. Officers stared, horror written across their faces. What kind of weapon was this? Varric forced his mind to work through the fear clawing at his thoughts. This wasn't like the human technology they had faced before. This was something else. Something more advanced than what the Dominion had encountered in any war. How? He muttered, gripping the console so tightly his claws dug into the metal. How is this possible? Sir, an officer whispered, his voice shaking. This isn't just another human ship. Varric turned, eyes burning with frustration. What are you saying? The officer swallowed hard. It's something different. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the voice returned. That voice. You should have listened. Varric felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. The calmness in that voice was worse than if it had been screaming in rage. It wasn't the voice of a soldier in battle. It was the voice of something that already knew it had won. You thought we were weak. The Dominion fleet scrambled, trying desperately to reposition. More ships fired in a wild attempt to hit something, anything. The ghostly warship dodged with unnatural precision. It was playing with them. You thought we were extinct. The human warship turned, lining up its next target. You were wrong. Another shot. Another battleship disappeared into nothingness. Panic broke through the ranks. Ships that had once held formation now fled in every direction. fled. The Dominion fleet, the mightiest force in the galaxy, was running. No. Varric slammed his fist on the console, his voice a desperate roar. Hold your positions. We are Dominion. Will we? The ship's main power flickered. Varric's words died in his throat as the lights dimmed, as his ship's systems shut down. A shadow loomed over them. The human warship was no longer attacking. It was right there, hovering above the flagship, watching, waiting. Now, the voice whispered, softer than before, but filled with something unbreakable. You understand fear. Admiral Varric stood frozen, staring at the dark screen in front of him. His command deck was plunged into silence, the hum of power systems now dead. The Dominion flagship, the pride of the fleet, the unbreakable spearhead of their military, was now nothing more than a floating husk in space. Outside, the human warship waited. It had stopped attacking. But that was somehow worse. It hovered just beyond their ruined fleet, like a predator watching its prey realize that escape was impossible. A deep, terrible dread settled in Varric's chest. The Dominion had spent centuries waging wars, crushing weaker species, and wiping out enemies who dared resist them. They had faced rebellions, fleets of resistance, entire empires that threw everything they had into battle. But never this. Never an enemy that fought like this. Varric's crew scrambled, clawed fingers flying over powerless consoles, desperate for any response. Officers barked commands into dead comms. The panic was spreading fast. This was not how the Dominion fought. This is impossible. An officer stammered, his hands shaking. One ship, one ship, against the might of the Dominion. Admiral, another officer shouted, eyes wide with barely contained fear. We've lost everything. Shields, weapons, engines, we are completely disabled. Varric's mind raced. The logic of the situation screamed at him that it was wrong. The Dominion had billions of warships. Even if they lost here, even if this battle was a disaster, they would recover. They would strike back. They would. Do you feel it now? The voice. The same human voice that had haunted the comms since the battle began. The bridge crew froze. It was no longer a broadcast across open channels. It was inside their ship. Varric's blood ran cold. That should have been impossible. Their security systems were impenetrable. No enemy had ever hacked into the Dominion's flagships. Not once. The screens flickered, and suddenly, they could see it. The human warship, up close. It was no ordinary vessel. It was ancient, yet terrifyingly advanced. Its hull was sleek, dark, and wrong in a way Varric couldn't describe. It shifted, as though reality itself struggled to define its existence. It had no clear weapon ports, no visible engines, yet it moved with the precision of something that had evolved beyond technology. You always believed you were the strongest. The voice remained calm, controlled, but there was something else in it now. Something cold. You've conquered worlds. You've slaughtered those weaker than you. Varric clenched his fists, rage fighting against the terror creeping into his mind. What do you want? He growled, forcing his voice to remain steady. For the first time, there was a pause. The silence dragged on too long. Then the voice returned. I want you to understand. The warship moved, not toward them, but past them. It glided through the wreckage of the Dominion fleet, ignoring the disabled ships, ignoring the debris. It was searching. Then, suddenly, a single Dominion warship fired. A desperate shot. A last stand. A mistake. The human warship reacted before the weapon was even fully fired. A blink of movement. A shift. One moment it was there. The next, it had closed the distance in an instant. A flash of light. The Dominion warship simply vanished. Not destroyed. Not turned into debris. It was gone, as if it had never existed. Panic erupted. They have some kind of weapon that. Admiral, we need to surrender. Surrender. Varric hissed, spinning to face the terrified officer. The Dominion does not surrender. But as he said it, he knew the words were hollow. This is not a war, the voice whispered again. A faint hum began to rise within the Dominion flagship. Systems flickered, but not with their power. Something else was controlling it. This is your reckoning. The flagship's lights surged, and then, for the first time in his life, Admiral Varric felt true helplessness. Admiral Varric felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. His ship, the mighty Dominion flagship, was no longer his to command. The lights flickered in eerie synchronization, the systems unresponsive to his crew's desperate attempts to regain control. Something else had taken over. Something human. Outside, the lone human warship hovered in the wreckage of what was once the Dominion's most powerful fleet. It did not attack. It did not pursue the retreating vessels. It simply waited. It was a predator that had already won the hunt, now watching its prey struggle with the horror of its own weakness. You were never fighting a war. The voice returned, smooth, measured, and terrifyingly calm. It echoed through the bridge, through their failing comms, through their very minds. Wars have rules. Wars have purpose. But this. The human ship shifted. It did not move. It shifted, as if it was rewriting its position in space rather than traveling. One moment it was in front of the Dominion fleet, the next it was behind them. Instantly. The crew gasped. Varric's heart pounded in his chest. That wasn't technology. That was something else. This is something you brought upon yourselves. A new sound filled the bridge, a low, pulsing hum. It resonated through the ship's structure, through their bones. Varric had fought 1,000 battles, crushed rebellions, wiped civilizations off the galactic map. But he had never heard this sound before. It was not an alarm. It was not a warning. It was judgment. A sensor officer's voice trembled. Admiral, we're detecting something inside the ship. Varric's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair. Be specific, he snapped. The officer swallowed hard. It's everywhere. A signal. Something is. Inside our systems. Rewriting code. Altering. The lights above them turned a deep blood red. Then the screaming started. It came from the lower decks. From the barracks. From the engineering bay. Dozens, then hundreds of voices, shrieking in raw, animalistic terror. Officers grabbed their comms, barking demands for reports. But no one answered. The screaming only grew worse. And then, one by one, the voices fell silent. A young officer clutched his headset, his skin pale with shock. Admiral, our soldiers, our crew, they're gone. Varric's breath caught. What do you mean, gone? The officer's hands trembled. I don't know. No bodies, no signs of struggle. The security footage is just empty corridors. It's like they vanished. The hum deepened. The screens flickered. And then, suddenly, they saw it. The main display, once filled with tactical data, now showed something else. It was the inside of their own ship, but not as it should have been. The hallways were dark, endless. Shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching, shifting like they were alive. The lights flickered, revealing movement that was there and not there. Then a shape emerged. Tall, humanoid, human. Its face was obscured, its form blurred as if reality itself refused to define it. It stood motionless for several seconds, then slowly, terrifyingly, it turned its head toward the screen, looking directly at the bridge crew. The red lights pulsed. You never understood what you were fighting. The shadow moved. The screen cut to static. The hum stopped. For several moments, no one spoke. No one breathed. The bridge was dead silent. Then, one final message appeared on the main screen. Run. Varric did not hesitate. All remaining ships, retreat. Get us out of here now. Engines flared. The remaining Dominion vessels turned, fleeing the battlefield as fast as their damaged thrusters could push them. No one looked back. As the fleet jumped into FTL, Varric clenched his fists, his mind racing with one terrifying thought. They had believed they were the ultimate power in the galaxy. They had believed they understood war. They had believed humanity was just another enemy. But now, they understood the truth. They had never fought humans before. And now, they had woken something they could never defeat. Admiral Varric sat motionless in his command chair, his breathing shallow, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The Dominion fleet, once the most feared force in the galaxy, had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing through the void like frightened prey. The human warship had not pursued them. It had not needed to. The damage was already done. They had come to this battle expecting a victory, believing they had crushed the last remnants of human resistance. Instead, they had met something they could not understand, something that had rewritten the rules of war itself. The retreating Dominion ships jumped from system to system, hoping to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the terror they had encountered. But no matter how far they ran, the fear remained. It crept through their thoughts, coiling around their sanity like a parasite. Every sensor reading, every flicker of a screen, every distorted transmission made their hearts pound in dread. Varric's claws gripped the armrests of his chair as he stared at the bridge crew. They were breaking. Some whispered to themselves, some refused to meet each other's eyes, and others simply sat still, their faces drained of all emotion. These were elite Dominion officers, hardened warriors, and yet, after one encounter with a single human warship, they looked like survivors of a massacre. But the massacre had not come from weapons or fleets. It had come from something deeper, something worse. Just then, the comms crackled to life, and every officer on the bridge flinched. The voice on the other end belonged to Captain Raylos, one of the few commanders who had escaped. "Admiral, something is wrong. His words cut off abruptly, replaced by a horrible, unnatural static. Varric leaned forward, his claws tightening. "Captain, report." There was no response. The screen that had displayed Raylos's ship blinked out. No explosion, no sign of attack. It was as if the entire vessel had simply ceased to exist. A murmur of terror spread through the bridge. Then, another ship's signal vanished, and another. One by one, Dominion vessels disappeared, their locations blinking out from the tactical display like dying stars. There were no distress calls, no warnings, just silence. The helmsman's hands trembled over the controls. "Admiral, we're the last one left." Varric's blood turned to ice. How? How was this possible? They were already light years away from the battle, already beyond the reach of any known weapon. This shouldn't be happening. His mind raced for answers, but before he could issue an order, the main display flickered to life. It showed a corridor, the interior of their own ship. But something was wrong. The lights barely illuminated the metal walls, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting in ways that defied logic. The camera feed panned slightly, as if something unseen had taken control. Then, in the dim glow, a figure appeared. Tall, human. The bridge fell deathly silent. The figure stood motionless for several seconds, then slowly, unnervingly, tilted its head. The shadows around it moved. The red emergency lights pulsed once. Then the screaming began. The sound did not come from the bridge. It came from everywhere else. The crew on the lower decks, the engineers, the soldiers, all of them. One by one, their voices rose into shrieks of raw terror. The security feeds showed nothing but empty corridors. No bodies. No struggle. Just darkness. Then suddenly, the screaming stopped. The bridge officers sat frozen in horror. They all knew what that meant. They were the only ones left. A deep, pulsing hum filled the ship, resonating through the walls, through their very bones. The screens glitched, distorting the image of the thing that stood in the corridor. Its face remained hidden, blurred by something unnatural. Then, a message appeared on every monitor, every console, every display across the ship. There is no weary left to run. Varric's breath caught in his throat. His mind screamed at him to act, to do something, but deep down, he already knew the truth. This was not just a battle. This was punishment. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, driven to extinction, hunted across the stars. And now they had become something else, something the Dominion had never been prepared to face. The hum deepened, vibrating through the ship, and the red lights pulsed one final time. The last Dominion warship, the last survivor of the fleet, drifted silently in the void. Then, without a sound, it vanished. The Dominion Empire was vast, stretching across thousands of systems, ruling through sheer military might. But now, something had changed. Something was different. It began with silence. Fleet Command had expected Admiral Varric's victorious return. Instead, they received nothing. No reports, no distress calls, not even wreckage. An entire battle fleet, one of the strongest armadas in the Dominion, had vanished without a trace. The High Council sat in their towering citadel, gazing at the reports with disbelief. The war should have ended that day. The Dominion was supposed to have won. The last human world had been crushed. Their final defenses shattered. It should have been over. And yet, the Dominion's most powerful warships had disappeared into the void. At first, the Council thought it was a malfunction, a mere failure in long-range communications. But then, the whispers began. The smaller colonies, the outposts, the stations at the edge of the Dominion's reach, they started going dark. No distress signals, no warnings, just emptiness. Fleet Command sent scout ships to investigate. They never returned. Then the reports started, from survivors. Few and scattered, their testimonies were almost impossible to believe. A single human warship had appeared out of nowhere. Not a fleet, not an armada, just one. It moved through the darkness, silent as death itself. It didn't fire traditional weapons. It didn't need to. One survivor, barely clinging to sanity, described how their ship's systems shut down without reason. Their crew heard voices that weren't there, saw shadows moving where there was nothing. Then the lights flickered, and one by one, they began to disappear. Another officer, one of the Dominion's best, had been found days later, drifting in a lifepod, his eyes wide with terror. He spoke only one sentence before he lost consciousness. They're not human anymore. Panic spread like wildfire. Entire fleets refused to deploy. Generals hesitated. The High Council demanded answers, but none came. The Dominion had always ruled through fear, but now they were the ones afraid. Then the final message came. Across every Dominion world, every station, every fleet, their screens flickered. The image was distorted, dark, almost unreadable, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Tall, human, standing in the void, surrounded by shifting shadows. The council chambers fell deathly silent as the image remained on their massive central display. And then, across all communication networks, across every world in their empire, one message appeared. Run. A cold chill swept through the chambers. The Dominion, the rulers of the galaxy, the conquerors of countless species, had never been told to run. Never. But now, staring into the darkness that had swallowed their mightiest fleet, they realized the truth. The war wasn't over. It had just begun.